Well, it's been over a year since the Department of Public Enterprises announced that Takatso Consortium as a South African Airways strategic equity partner with 51% ownership of SAA, but the deal has yet to be finalized. Now, in its latest statement, SAA says that Takatso transaction is beset with delays emanating from legal requirements to comply with aviation regulatory conditions. Now, following the DPE's response to Parliament last week, concerns of a possible liquidation have also emerged. SAA has since disputed the reports and said that the department's statement has been taken out of context, exaggerated and blown out of proportion. Aviation analyst Desmond Latham joins us to discuss these developments further. Des, good morning. Good to have you with us on Morning Live again.
Morning, and thanks for having me.
Now, SAA's interim chief commercial officer, Tebogo Tsimane, said that SAA's statement that the onboarding of the 51% shareholder was a priority and that the deal is in its final stages. But it's been more than a year, Des, so what exactly is the holdup?
Yes, I mean, we're all wondering, and if you take notice of what the process has been over the last 2 years, things are not looking good in terms of Takatso's deal, and there are a number of outstanding issues there, including the certification. Number of certification issues. There was a breach and had been a failure to adhere to some routes, which is the latest issue that's popped up, and SAA will likely, or has lost the rights to those routes. You don't fly the routes around the world, around the globe, consistently over the period of a year. And some have 3-month rules, then you lose the rights to those routes. Obviously, they're in demand at the moment with lockdowns over and people flying again. So SAA has not been flying these routes and will likely lose them or has lost them. And getting them back is really difficult in a very competitive environment. So when you look at a functioning airline, one of the ways it makes money, of course, is to fly passengers. And if you lose rights to the routes, the headwinds there are extreme. So that's the first thing. The second thing that's come up is that there's a dispute over the ticket rights. SAA has said that all previous tickets that ticket owners had, particularly government officials and others that flew SAA, they will be guaranteed, but there's been no clarification. Third is management. The certain certification and flight ops, you have to be certified as an operator and your officials and management have to be certified. So the questions around that. And lastly, the big one, the elephant in the room, is the financial statements. The last financial statement that of any value that we saw Parliament receive recently was up to 2017, which is 5 years out of date.
So why is this acceptable, Des? And I want to ask another stupid question. So SAA, when it went into business rescue, that was because it was struggling financially, had been doing so for years. And of course, the South African public, with everything else that's going on with Eskom and all other state-owned entities, was getting fed up with the bailouts to SAA, which is seen by and large as a vanity project. So we had the problem with SAA. We were told there would be an equity partner that would come in and alleviate the financial burden on the South African taxpayer and government. And then SAA takes to the skies minus the equity partner. So what's going on?
Well, I think that's a bit of a sleight of hand, if you excuse me for saying so. I mean, the taxpayer is still going to pick up 14.6 billion rand of debt. And Takatso will only inject 3 billion, I say only. But so you can see the difference here. That's 4 times the amount the taxpayer is still going to pay on the debt owned. So we're not out of, out of the long grass, if you like, as a tax-paying entity. And that's why you say that this project makes little sense. If you look at what's happened since then, things have developed rapidly in the aviation sector as we speak. I mean, look at their competitors. They're flying and they're literally eating SAA's lunch at the moment. Even international airlines have taken over the direct routes. United, Delta to the US, for example, are flying multiple times a day now into the USA. What is SAA going to get? That was one of their money-making routes, was to JFK. They don't have it anymore. So there are many questions around the operation. Yes, you can, whatever politics is going on here in terms of a national airline, there are missteps that have been made. And I'm afraid to say that people are just fast asleep, because the rest of the aviation sector is shot past SAA, the management, the board, and the shareholder, who happens to be government. The real operators of airlines are making money by flying airplanes now. And while this lot, Takatso and others, argue about when they'll start, how much money is earned, who's going to do what and when, the sector has taken off, if you excuse the pun.
And this is, of course, what appears to make no sense at all. And you talk about Takatso's 3 billion and what the taxpayer is currently footing, and you say it makes little sense. I say it makes no sense at all, Des, from the onset. If you think of what they are getting for what they are putting in, it makes absolutely no logical sense. But this is where it is. And now, as you point out, the equity partner seems to be, at the center of SAA's current afflictions. So how soon do they have to resolve this matter in order for it to still be a viable sort of deal that's on the table?
That's a great question. I mean, if you look at the creditors, the people owed money, and they're extensive, and a lot of them are, for example, are leasing companies, international leasing agencies, Wells Fargo, for example, and Irish entities. They owned hundreds of millions of dollars. So they've allowed government to underwrite this in a kind of bond process, which is to say we guarantee over the long term you get your money back at some point. So they've been kept in the loop. Second thing is the banks of South Africa are the other biggest losers in the 14 billion I've just quoted to you. These banks are part of government systems. So government hires banks in South Africa to pay their accounts of their staff and so on. So banks don't want to necessarily fight government on this either. So you're getting the situation that is developed that I think is based on time wasting. There's a change in Regulation 28, it's called the PIC Act, which comes up in January next year, which means that government can then tap funds to use on infrastructure broadly, which is has been redefined to include transport, which of course is SAA. So there's a cynical group of people who believe that this is purposefully like a starting grade technique, if you like, of pushing back constantly, knowing that the creditors won't take action urgently because they're guaranteed by government in the long term, and that the government itself is waiting for the change of this act so they can, the state can access government employee funds starting from January next year to help fund the new Takatso deal in whatever sleights of hand. So there's not a lot of, as you can tell from my comments here, there's not a lot of confidence and trust.
And, this is, of course, how many people are seeing it, because the delays seemingly are not making any sense to many. Because when the announcement was made, Des, nobody would have thought that at this point we would still be waiting to see this particular deal completed. And now you talk about the licensing of the routes that were cancelled, also the number of aircraft that SAA currently has. And then you add to all of that, again, cynically, the fact that Mango had to be gotten rid of, and some would say so that Lyft could work in this particular deal. Let's talk about all of these things that have happened. And Mango, as a concern during the COVID time, they were flying when SAA was grounded. And then suddenly Mango is grounded and they are taken completely out of the picture. And here we are with SAA still minus Takatso.
Yeah, there have been missteps when it comes to managing the aviation sector. And it's, of course, government run, those two airlines, directly and indirectly. And people have pointed out to me and said, look, it's the state-run airlines don't work. And I said to them, that's just not true. Ethiopian Airlines is a state-owned airline, but it's not run by the government. It's run by people who know how to run airlines. The government actually owns it. The state owns the Ethiopian Airlines, and it made profits of $250 million in its last quarter of operations before the lockdown. So you can run an airline or own an airline as a government, but you cannot run an airline as a government. And that's where we sit with your Mango comment and with SAA. There's been this interference in operations. The board that took over following Jacob Zuma's incarceration as ANC president ran the airline into the ground. It was making profits until 2011 and made no more profits since. And that was under the aegis of a management team and a board that really I think should be investigated further, to be quite blunt. And we still live with the legacy of that, because the last financial statement we have from this group of management team and board members is 2017. We've gone through COVID and emerged out the side, and that started 3 years after the last financial results we have. We are 5 years down the line from then, and we're still talking about this. So I think that you've got to suspend your logic, belief in logic here at some point. And so why are we still talking about this? Well, it's because politicians really want to earn something out of SAA, starting next year when the regulations change over PIC and people can access funds and then the new tender processes will work, or whatever you call it. So we're very cynical about it. Meanwhile, Airlink has bought new and leased new wide narrow-body airliners, and is up to 46 or 50 airplanes, and SAA has 6. So, and Airlink, we didn't even know about it. If you had flown in aviation over the last 10 years, many of us in the sector, we knew Airlink. But, if you talk to the average person taking flights, FlySafair was a bit of a long shot for their knowledge base. Now, FlySafair, Seme, and Airlink are flying and are making money flying, and SAA is still wallowing.
And Des, the SAA media statement quotes the DP's acting DG, who said that if this deal falls through with Takatso, and if government cannot put more money into SAA, then the only option would be the liquidation of SAA. Now, I don't know what to make of that. So why have we gone through this whole rigmarole? Why have we incurred more liability as a going concern for SAA to just come back to this point?
Well, it's a great question. For some of the answer, you need to look at Comair. Kalula went through the same process and arrived at bankruptcy. So it's you can get a situation after some time of everything failing and having to kind of read the tea leaves properly eventually and take your medicine. So it's not just SAA. I mean, Comair was one of the most successful airlines in Africa and is now bankrupt. So it's not just their state-owned entity that's made missteps. We had some issues in South African aviation management, and particularly in the latter phase from 2017-18 onwards. There have been some basic mistakes made, especially by the owners and the boards, who made not just SAA, I'm pointing out here. So, but because we've focused on SAA, because it's taxpayers' money, I think that's the point here. Comair's investors made mistakes and were forced to make decisions based on financial decision-making, shareholding, and so on. Bidvest and others that were brought in to run it, they made mistakes, Comair. But SAA is your and my tax money going into that. And the government employees agency, for example, the pension fund from government employees, which is a major political problem for the PIC. So all of this makes it a touchy subject. And that's why we're dealing with it, and you're dealing with it on SABC, because the question is, why are we back here? Well, the aviation sector is really difficult to run if you don't know what you're doing. And SAA's management and board have made an error, and so did Comair. And because of that, the business is very unforgiving in aviation, particularly when fuel fares go 30% quarter on quarter and so on. So they've missed the boat, and that's the answer, is that we are back to where we began, like with Comair, and the future doesn't look very good for South African Airways.
No, it doesn't, but it also beggars belief that Parliament would accept the status quo of not having received financials from SAA since 2017. Why is that acceptable in any way, shape or form?
Yeah, I've said this before on other programs, that if this was an entity of the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, the management would possibly be arrested, let alone losing their jobs. And it's because of the state link and the need to have a state-owned airline, which is very much in the national strategic interest of a national government, is to have some kind of aviation. It's very high-tech, it's innovation, it's a proof of statement about being, especially post-apartheid, post-colonially. So it's very difficult dealing with all of that past history, muddying the waters, so to speak, and then discuss a financial aspect of SAA. So I think that's part of it. The second thing is that banks in South Africa do have a lot of money owed to them by SAA, so they don't want to necessarily put pressure, political pressure. And the third thing is politics. Cadre deployment led to where SAA is. It's very difficult in our environment right now to deal with this. The ruling party is finding it almost impossible to deal with when it comes to Eskom, and SAA is part of the same picture. So I think that's the broad picture that has emerged here. It's a hot potato that people are burning their fingers every time they touch.
And we're out of time. So just finally, the Department of Public Enterprises, they told Parliament that SAA needs to comply within 90 days. Now, given how we've seen this unfold, do you believe, Des, that they will be able to resolve this in 90 days and comply? And, beyond that, do you think that this is something worth holding on to for the South African public?
You know, if you look at the brand itself, this is a 80-year-old, over 70-year-old project that we're dealing with. It's tied to our nation state in many ways. And as a SADC, as a C member of SADC, we owe ourselves some kind of capacity in the science sphere to show that we are big boys in the room, so to speak. So I do think that SAA, not to mention all the skills and the jobs there, these are people's lives that we're talking about. So you put that all in a box and you say it is a valuable entity that we should try and work together on achieving some kind of satisfaction. However, the problem we have is that politicians, when they play in these waters, don't really know what they're doing. And being a science, this is Newton's laws we're talking about here. You can't twist those laws to suit the moment in time politically. And so my personal opinion is, yes, it is worth saving, and we need to apply ourselves as aviators first to this problem, as a sector in Africa, because we don't want Qatar Airlines and United of American to take over our routes as Africans. We do not want that. But we have other African-owned airlines. They're called Airlink, Fly, Safa, and Keme doing it. So I think we need to grow up a bit and accept that those people know what they're doing. They are Africans first. They may be white, but they are Africans, and we need to work together to get SAA as an entity going forward from here without taxpayers' money. And it is possible still, I believe, to do that.
Well, Des, we have to leave it there. Thank you so much for your time this morning, aviation analyst Desmond Latham.